Hello Year 5 and 6 and welcome to today's English lesson. So our big question for today is, can I identify and use commas to avoid ambiguity? So first of all, we're going to have a little think about what it means to be ambiguous and why we use commas. So I'd like you to pause the video now while you have a think about your answers to these two questions. So if we're being ambiguous, it means that we're leaving something open to more than one interpretation. So it means that you can think that something has more than one meaning. And we use commas for lots of reasons. We use them for pauses in our writing. We use them to indicate parenthesis and relative clauses and subordinate clauses. We use them in lists, but we also use them to clarify the meaning. So this means that we avoid ambiguity. We stop that idea that there's more than one meaning to something. So we're going to have a little look at these sentences here. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a think about why a comma has been used. Max had bought cheese, pears, sausage rolls and pickle, especially for the picnic. Autumn, who was only 9 years old, was a better piano player than many students twice his age. The rain was certainly heavy, but the sun was suggesting it hadn't gone for good. I was amazed at how much I had got done in the day, she said. When they finally reached their destination, they realised he had been right all along. The artist, who was a bit of a dreamer, sat and painted the sea. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video now and write down why you think a comma has been used in each of those sentences. So for that first sentence, you might have written down that it was a list. So they're listing the things that Max has brought to the picnic. So that could be why we've used commas there. For the second sentence, they've been used to indicate that a relative clause is present within that sentence. So who was only 9 years old? Remember, who is my relative pronoun? Our third sentence, it's been used to indicate that a subordinate clause is there. So some extra information has been put into this sentence, and that's why we've used that comma. Sentence 4, where we're looking at some direct speech, and I know it's direct speech because it's got inverted commas. We've used a comma because we always have to include a piece of punctuation before we close those inverted commas. Remember, this could be a comma, a question mark, a full stop if it's the end of the sentence, or an exclamation mark. Sentence number 5, when they finally reached their destination, they realised he had been right all along. A comma has been used there because we've used a fronted adverbial, when they finally reach their destination. And we know that if we use a fronted adverbial, we must put a comma after it. And the final sentence, the artist who was a bit of a dreamer sat and painted the sea. Again, a comma has been used there to indicate that a relative clause is present within that sentence, and the relative pronoun who has been used again for that relative clause. So for today's first activity, I'd like you to watch the video which is titled Punctuation Using Commas to Clarify Meaning, and you can find this on the blog. This is going to go through what ambiguity is in a little bit more detail with you and help you to understand how commas can clarify meaning within sentences. Once you've watched the video, please come back to this PowerPoint so we can continue with today's lesson. Okay, so moving on to our second activity for today, and this is going to require you to get a little bit creative and bring out your artistic side. So what you've got to do is you have got to draw the sentence. So you have got a sentence, and there's an example here, it says eat Daniel, and you have got to draw exactly what you think that sentence means. Now, it hasn't got a comma here, so we're not avoiding ambiguity. To me, that reads as you've got to eat the person, Daniel. So the image that I would draw, I've interpreted that sentence as somebody is eating Daniel. So that is what I would have to draw. Have a little think about where the comma should go if we're not supposed to be eating Daniel, but telling Daniel that he needs to eat something. So on the blog, you'll find a document called Draw the Sentence, and you've got some examples like this, and then you're going to draw exactly what the sentence says. Have a look, see if they use commas. Do they clarify meaning and avoid ambiguity? When you've finished, come back to the PowerPoint and the video and we can continue with today's learning. Okay, so our third activity for today, again, this can be found on the blog under the heading Wednesday Then Grammar, and it's called adding commas. So for this activity, you need to decide whether a comma needs to be added to the sentence, and if so, explain why you have added that comma. So on the next slide, we're going to have a look at a couple of examples together. Now, the comma might not necessarily always be added to avoid ambiguity. It could be some of those reasons that we looked at the very beginning of the lesson. So we talked about separating items in a list, for relative clauses, for subordinate clauses. So make sure you read your sentences really, really carefully. Okay, so I've got the sentence, the rabbit had long, sharp, pointy teeth. Do you think I should include some commas in this sentence? And if so, why do you think I should be including them? Pause the video while you have a little think and maybe add those commas into where you think they belong within the sentence. So I have put 2 commas within this sentence and I've listed them between the 2 adjectives long and sharp and pointy. And then I've written my explanation. So I have added 2 commas to this sentence because I am listing adjectives to describe the rabbit's pointy teeth. These commas give the reader a chance to pause when reading the sentence. I have not needed to add commas to this sentence to avoid ambiguity or clarify meaning. So the reason that I have used these commas isn't to not be ambiguous. It's to explain that I have got more than one adjective within my sentence and I have separated them. Did you agree with me? Okay, let's have a look at another example together then. As the campers sat round the fire eating, the bear stayed in the bushes. Do you think we should be using a comma in this sentence? Where do you think it should go and why? So I've said that we definitely need a comma to clarify the meaning and avoid ambiguity in this sentence. And I've put my comma between eating and the. So I've added a comma after the word eating in this sentence. I have done this to avoid ambiguity and clarify meaning. Without the comma, someone may infer that the campers are eating the bear, whereas by placing that comma in, it makes it clear that the campers are not eating the bear and that the bear is separate to the campers. Okay, so we can see here how we have used a comma to avoid ambiguity. So we've not left something open to interpretation, it's not got more than one meaning. So I'd like you to have a go at activity 2, which is on the blog and it's titled Adding Commas, and then come back to this video for our final part of today's lesson. Okay then, so our final activity, activity 4, it can be found on the blog under the heading Wednesday Then Grammar and it's titled Image for Writing. So for this activity, you're going to be generating your own sentences to match the image. You need to make sure that you are using commas within your sentences. So on the next slide, I've done some example sentences. You can magpie ideas from this or use this as a starting point for your own writing. The day had finally come. The giraffe, who was grazing merrily, was blissfully unaware of the approaching beast. So you'll notice that I've got a pair of commas within that sentence. That's because I've used the relative clause, who was grazing merrily. The lion murmured to himself, time for dinner. So I've used a comma here to indicate that I am about to start my direct speech. Remember, there has to be a piece of punctuation before the direct speech if you're putting who said it and how they've said it at the start of that sentence. Suddenly, a rustle came from the whispering bushes. Again, I've used the fronted adverbial suddenly there, so I need to make sure that I include a comma after that. Can you have a read of the next couple of sentences within my writing and identify why I have used a comma? I'd then like you to write some of your own sentences to match the image, using commas to clarify meaning, avoid ambiguity, indicate subordinate clauses or relative clauses, and for our fronted adverbials or any direct speech. If you have any questions about anything that we have been through today, then you can find my email address on the Year 6 class page.